third institute lecture of this semester. We are indeed happy that we have amidst us renowned scientist, Professor Rama Jaisundar, who had graciously consented to our request to deliver lecture on this forum, whereby she can interact with the faculty members and students. Indeed, she is a nationally and internationally a renowned figure, yet decorum demands that for the benefit of my students, I introduce her, and I have the pleasure to do the same. Professor Rama Jaisundar is the professor and head department of Nuclear Magnetic Resonance and Magnetic Resonance Imaging, All India Institute of Medical Sciences, New Delhi. She has a unique and unusual career trajectory, a PhD from University of Cambridge, United Kingdom. She is trained in physics and nuclear magnetic resonance. While pioneering biomedical magnetic resonance work in India, she enrolled for the 5.5 years undergraduate medical degree as a full-time student at the age of 41. Despite securing admission for MBBS, she opted for a medical degree in Ayurveda, BAMS. She is the only one at both international and national level to hold dual degrees in physics and Ayurveda. As a magnetic resonance scientist, her areas of specialization is biomedical NMR, clinical imaging, and spectroscopy, neuroscience applications of magnetic resonance, radiofrequency coil designing and building, and radiofrequency pulse sequence programming, to name a few. She has wide experience in both experimental and clinical MRI and spectroscopy. Her indigenously developed low-cost radiofrequency coil for the clinical magnetic resonance scanners costing less than 5% of the manufacturers of what the manufacturers sell had won her the Young Scientist Award. During her stint as a visiting professor at the Max Planck Institute of Biochemistry in Göttingen, Germany, she worked on the functional magnetic resonance spectroscopy techniques. She has a number of research publications and awards and honors to her credit. Her current research interests harness her distinctive training in experimental magnetic resonance, physics, Ayurveda, and modern medicine for innovative research in Ayurveda, its concepts, methods, pharmacology, and clinical practices using NMR, MRI, and a number of analytical techniques. With the limited interactions that I've had with ma'am, I can also add that she is a scholar, although she likes to call herself as a history buff, but she is well endowed with knowledge about Indian history and particularly South Indian history. And it's always enlightening to have any kind of interactions with ma'am. With these few words, I now request Professor Rama Jaisundar to talk to us on this wonderful and a very timely topic, allopathy and Ayurveda, how they differ and why it matters. Over to you, ma'am.
Good evening to everybody, and thank you for that very kind introduction, Dr. Ramanathan. So it gives me great pleasure, immense pleasure to be giving a lecture at the BHU lecture series. And I thank Dr. Ramanathan for inviting me for this. The topic is Ayurveda and conventional medicine, how they differ and why it matters. Are you all able to see the screen?
Yes, ma'am. We are able to see it. Yes.
Yeah. So I'm going to start with this part of the question, why it matters. Now, we all know that allopathy and Ayurveda, there are differences. I mean, it is natural, one would expect them to have differences. But are the differences so important that it merits a lecture for 30-35 minutes? So that's the question, and let us see. So modern medicine uses sophisticated technologies for diagnosis and treatment. Some of us are part of these developments as well. And we all know how science and technology has propelled modern medicine forward, and we now have such nuanced information about the human system. Now, these in addition to this, we are also living in a time period where the physical and the material comforts have increased enormously. So there were certain things that we used to struggle to do maybe even a decade ago, and those things have become very, very common. For example, very, very easy. For example, the communication. Right. So we are living in a time period where science and technology has made such wonderful changes to our lives at a personal level, and also at the level of knowledge, and giving us technology to handle health and disease. Now, this being the case, we would expect the world to be, I mean, we cannot say that there will not be any diseases, but at least a reduction in ill health. But the ground reality is not this. There is an increased, incidences of ill health. In fact, you can there may not be very many people who can be called completely healthy. I mean, when I say healthy, mental health is also included. So the hospitals, they are bursting at the seams, and the past year and a half we have seen the pandemic as well, COVID pandemic, and how it has turned the world literally upside down. So why is this paradox? So we have a science and technology supported modern system with so much information, so much wherewithals for diagnosis and treatment and whatnot. But the diseases are not decreasing; they are increasing by day. So it is for this exact reason that world over there is growing interest or attention, I would say, on alternative systems of medicine. So when I say alternative systems of medicine, Ayurveda plays a very, very important role in the alternative systems of medicine. And leaving aside the commercial aspects and other vested interests, a true doctor will always have this question in mind: how else can I help the patient? So here we have two systems. One is the conventional modern medicine, and which is heavily supported by science and technology and research. And we see it happening. Some of us are part of this research as well. And on the other hand, we have Ayurveda. So there are a lot of skepticism, and people are wondering, how a system which is more than 5,000 years old can have any answers at all for the modern day maladies, and how how it can even be compared, put on par with modern medicine. Now the situation is that people are looking for help from Ayurveda. So it's better that we look at the system and see how these two systems differ, where they match, where they do not, and what these differences mean. Because it's very important that we know these before we use it for the benefit of the patient. Now we are also talking of integrating the two systems. So it's very, very important that we understand the differences and see how, why, and where Ayurveda differs from modern medicine. So let me start with the first question. How does it differ? So when we have a system as complex as the human system, we need to conceptualize it. We need to have a model using which we understand how the system functions. And we also use that understanding and knowledge to handle health and disease. So when we look at the conventional medicine, it has conceptualized the human system as shown in this slide here. So anything physical in the world has atom as the fundamental entity, and modern medicine considers humans as predominantly physical in nature and with functions associated with the structures, the physicality. So at the end is the atom, which is the fundamental building block of everything physical in the nature and including the humans. And then you have molecules, then you have organelles, cells, tissue, organ system, and the entire organism. So the human system is understood in terms of the components. Now let us look at how Ayurveda has conceptualized the human system. It has conceptualized it in a very, very different way. You can see the stark difference in the way the two systems of medicine have conceptualized the same human system. So here Ayurveda looks at 4 different domains: structural domain, a physiological domain, a psychological domain, and a domain of consciousness. But you can also see the areas of overlap here. So making this entire human system as a seamless, interconnected whole. So I will come back to this slide a bit later and explain this in a bit more depth. But for the moment, you see how the two systems have conceptualized the human system in very different ways. So in Ayurveda, we are seamlessly mind, body, and soul. You can see that there is a body, the structural entity is connected to the physiological domain, and this is connected to the psychological domain, and this is connected to the subtle domain of consciousness. And very interestingly, the subtlest part of our existence is connected to the gross structural domain through this first level of awareness, which is the physical body. So this is how Ayurveda has conceptualized us humans as being seamlessly mind, body, and soul. In fact, it also talks about how the individuals, how humans are connected with the external. So Ayurveda says that from the core of our being to the vast expanse of the universe, we exist as one. The whole universe is the expansion of one's consciousness. So this is how Ayurveda has conceptualized the human system. And let us look at the classification in Ayurveda of the human system, and which it uses to understand not only health, but also manage health and disease. So Ayurveda has classified the human system as a gross and subtle aspect. That is the Sthula Sharira and the Sukshma Sharira. And in the gross aspect has further classification, sub-classifications. So Ayurveda has a structure-based classification. So this word dhatu is in Sanskrit, and it indicates the structures, or you call it tissue elements. So this structural classification deals with the physical aspect of the human existence. There is another classification which is functional in nature, and these functions are defined by what are called doshas. And this deals with the physiological and psychological components of the humans. Now, implicit in this is the physical aspect as well, because the physiology does not occur without the physical structures. Now, there is a third level of classification, which is a system-wise classification defined by what are called srotas. Srotas refers to channels. And so this deals with, there is an explicit mention of physical in this. So physical, physiological, and psychological aspects of the human system is covered in this classification. Now coming to the subtle aspect of the human system. So it talks about levels of awareness, and this deals with psychological and other realms, subtler realms of awareness. So I want to talk about a bit about this functional classification, because it runs as an undercurrent to the entire understanding of health and disease, and also the management of health and disease in Ayurveda. So I will touch upon this, not in depth, but quickly. So when you say functions, it has a number of parameters. So function is not a single parameter entity. So there are many many parameters which gives rise to functions. So functions can be called an emergent property of many parameters. So structures are important, and biochemistry is important. There are a number of activities I have mentioned some here. There are many which are not mentioned in the slide. All these put together results in the function. Now, it is interesting to see that structures and biochemistry, which forms the fulcrum of how the human system is understood and managed in modern medicine, comes under is part of these functions. So Ayurveda has identified 3 major functions in the body, and that's how they have classified. So movement, metabolism, and growth. In the context of Ayurveda, these are called Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. And so for convenience, I'm going to refer to these as B, P, and K. So let me quickly take you all through to give you all an idea as to what comes under these classifications of Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. All movements in body and mind comes under Vata. So Ayurveda never delinks body and mind. Body and mind, they are always considered as one cohesive unit in Ayurveda, be it in understanding health or disease. So when I say movements, gross movements, from gross movements to subtle movements, everything comes under Vata. So you see a person running here, this is a gross movement, and then you can see a subtle movement, movement of blood, and then the movement of the heart as well. And then here you can see a cell membrane, you can see molecules, ions are moving in and out of the cell membrane. And this is an even subtler movement of thoughts. So all movements from gross to subtle comes under Vata. Vata coordinates all sense faculties. It initiates all types of actions. And one prime example of Vata is the central nervous system. Now, Pitta deals with all metabolic processes. So digestion and transformation, both at the physical and the mental level. The thought processes come under Pitta, and the digestion of food and nutrients also comes under, it's a function that comes under Pitta. And pH and temperature are 2 defining parameters under Pitta. Of course, Ayurveda does not mention pH, but it talks about acidity, amlatva. So, and the inference is, logical inference is that it refers to pH. So we know that in modern science also considers these 2 parameters as defining parameters for metabolic processes. Now, Kapha deals with physical growth and support. And Kapha is responsible for structural basis, stability, and lubrication. There are more parameters which comes under Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, but I have just I'm sharing with you all some of the important parameters only. So here you can see the physical growth of the fetus, and that comes under Kapha. So all the psychophysiological functions in the body comes under V, P, and K. So there are no psychophysiological functions which comes outside the purview of V, P, and K. Now, this is a very broad-based classification, and there are also sub-classification of V, P, and K. Each of them are subclassified into 5 subtypes each. So between these 15 subtypes of V, P, and K, all the psychophysiological functions in the body are covered, and it can be explained and managed as well. A notable feature of this kind of conceptualization of the human system in Ayurveda is the absence of hierarchy. So here you see the model that is adopted by modern medicine. Here, this is a structurally hierarchical model. Structural hierarchy you can see. So at the fundamental level, you have the atoms, then you have molecules, and as you keep moving up the structural hierarchy, you have different complex structural components emerge. So whereas in Ayurveda, there is no hierarchy. So for example, here you see the development of a fetus. So you cannot say that movement comes first, metabolism comes next, and then the physical growth. right? So all these three happen side by side. So this is what I mean by absence of hierarchy in the Ayurvedic standpoint of how it understands the human system. So VP and K encompass the entire psychophysiological functions, but what makes it very clinically useful and a workable model is the second point here, that VP and K are characterized by parameters that are biophysical, chemical, and physiological in nature, and there are also psychological indices. So let us see some examples of what kind of parameters comes under Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. So if you look at the biophysical parameters, Ayurveda talks of dryness, fluidity, adhesivity, size, stiffness, viscosity, weight, elasticity, roughness, and so on. And as I already mentioned, pH and temperature are defining parameters that comes under Pitta. And these are some of the psychological indices that gets grouped under Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. Creativity, anxiety, confidence, leadership quality, patience, fear, endurance, insecurity, stress, all these come or psychological indices which are grouped under either Vata, Pitta, or Kapha. Now, these parameters are connected with each other. Now, this is just a small example. So, if there is increase in dryness, there would be changes in movement, temperature, fluidity, heaviness, lubrication, and roughness. These are just some of the parameters which would be affected by a change in dryness. So if you look at, if you put together all the parameters that comes under B, P, and K, you can actually draw a network as I have drawn here. And all these parameters are connected with each other. And so this is a picture that I have taken from a systems biology book. And this network here shows the network of genes. So when we talk of network, there are nodes and then there are associations. So the only difference between this and this is what the nodes represent. Here the nodes represent many of these, the VP and K or biophysical parameters. Some of them are chemical and physiological in nature. So all these are parameters, and you can see the associations between these various parameters. So when this network is in balance, it denotes health in Ayurveda. And disease is a system perturbation. When this network is perturbed, the perturbation can result from diet, from activities, from environment, from stress. So anything that perturbs this will cause an imbalance in this network. And if the individual has good immunity, then the network, the imbalance gets corrected by itself. If that does not happen, then we have disease. So disease is a system perturbation in Ayurveda. So how is this concept of Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, how is it translated to practice? In fact, I prefer calling the concept of Vata, Pitta, and Kapha as theory, because this theory of Vata, Pitta, and Kapha is what is used for diagnosing unknown diseases as well. So what the ancient Indians had done, the Ayurvedic acharyas, something very indigenous and very, very clever. They had made this VPK as a common platform for all parameters which play a role in health and disease. So we know that, lifestyle activities, environment, seasons, food ingredients, animals, when I say animals, they are also part of our diet, and medicinal and edible plants. All these play a role in our health and disease. And so they are all classified in terms of VP and K. The clinical symptoms are also classified in terms of VP and K. So based on the clinical symptoms, whether they come under Vata, Pitta, or Kapha, or a combination, the diagnosis is made. And once the diagnosis is made, and the treatment becomes treatment also follows the same same strategy of using Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. So all the treatment strategies are, either to increase Vata or decrease Vata, or to increase Pitta or Kapha or decrease them, or to increase or decrease a combination of them. So VP and K provides the theoretical framework for all the psychosomatic life processes. And so the management in management of health and disease in Ayurveda is very different to that of modern medicine. It's very comprehensive. So there are physical interventions in the form of medicines, in the form of procedures called panchakarma, in the form of diet, and there are also non-pharmacological interventions, like yoga, meditation, chanting of mantras, and changes in lifestyle activities. So in a nutshell, Ayurveda is like how this, what this picture shows. So this is a picture of forest taken, from this height. So from this height, you get the entire landscape. You can capture the entire landscape. One cannot get fine details of, the individual trees and the leaves there, but one gets a global picture. And this picture is the microscopic structure of one of the leaf in one of the tree here. So modern medicine has great details about the system that we are studying, whereas Ayurveda has a kind of holistic picture. And so the question is, for what kind of picture is necessary to manage a system is the question. Okay, but I'm not addressing that. But what I want to convey through this picture is that when you look at things from different heights, it gives different views, and different views lead us to different understanding, and different understanding lead us to different terminologies. So Ayurveda is looking at the system from a very different standpoint, height, compared to modern medicine, which is why the view of Ayurveda is different to that of modern medicine, and which is why the understanding of the human system is different in Ayurveda and modern medicine, and which is why the terminologies used are also different. So how these two systems differ is there are two major points. One is the conceptualization of the human system. That is how they differ, and how they have translated this conceptualization for practical purposes, both for maintenance of health and for diagnosis and treatment. Now, let us go on to the other question. Why does Ayurveda differ from modern medicine? After all, the human system is the same. Whether Ayurveda tries to understand it or modern medicine tries to understand, the heart is going to beat in the same way. The digestion process is going to take place in the same way. Nothing is going to be different. But why are these two systems looking at the same functioning system in an entirely different way? For this, we need to understand that systems of medicine, medical systems, are applied sciences. So they are not fundamental sciences. Both engineering and medicine, they are applied sciences. And there are basic sciences which contribute to the development of these medical systems. So if you look at, so the basic sciences, they provide concepts, theories, and methodologies to understand the biological system, to elucidate the physiology, to explain health and interpret diseases, and to develop techniques for diagnosis and treatment. So if you look at modern science, we know that the fundamental basic sciences are physics, chemistry, and mathematics. So let us see how modern medicine has used physics, or how physics has helped modern medicine understand the human system better, and then help it in managing the health and disease. So these are the various different disciplines in physics: mechanics, fluid dynamics, thermodynamics, electricity and magnetism, sound and light, quantum phenomena, nuclear physics. And you can see that the text, which is in white color, is denote the the concepts in these different disciplines. And the second one denotes how how modern medicine has used, what parameter has modern medicine tried to understand using this concept. And the third line denotes the technological development to manage clinical problems. So if you look at, let's take mechanics. So the concepts of energy and power has been used to understand how muscles function, and this understanding has led to the development of prosthetics. If you look at electricity and magnetism, it has been, these concepts have been used to understand the nerve action and potential, and these have given rise to ECG and EMG. So here you can see how quantum phenomena has given rise to X-ray and MR scanners. So I will not go into all these, but this is just to give you all an idea as to how modern medicine has used the various concepts in physics to understand the biology of the human system. So if we say that Ayurveda is as scientific as modern medicine is, there are people who would question this statement. But there would be people who will say that Ayurveda is as scientific as modern medicine. And I belong to that category of people who say that Ayurveda is as scientific as modern medicine. And so if we say that, then Ayurveda should also have certain fundamental sciences which has helped it to understand the human system, right? And what are they? Definitely they are not physics and chemistry, but they are called darshana. So what do these darshanas, what does it mean? It means to see, literally, it means to see, to view, to have an insight. Interestingly, the Greek word theoria has given rise to the word theory, and which also means to see, to view, to have an insight. So the darshanas offer theories and concepts on physical and non-physical realities, creation of universe, life and matter, constituents of physical matter, mind-body consciousness relationship, Tridoshas, that is the Vata, Pitta and Kapha, and the Panchamahabhutas, which are fundamental elements. And both these play a very important role. They are very important metrics in Ayurveda. Darshanas also talk about transformation of substances to form new products, how this can be done. It talks about concepts of measurements, time, weight, and length, and it offers methodologies for scientific study and analysis. So what are these darshanas? There are 6 darshanas: Sankhya, Nyaya, Vaiseshika, Mimamsa, Yoga, and Uttara Mimamsa. Uttara Mimamsa is also called Vedanta. These are generally referred to as philosophies, Indian philosophies. But so I don't want to get into that. But what I would like to point out is how the concepts of in each of these darshanas, how Ayurveda has utilized it. It has adapted and adopted some of these concepts to understand the human system, how it functions, and to understand health and disease, and to manage these as well. So, for example, in Sankhya, the concept of origin of universe and life and evolution of matter has been used by Ayurveda to understand the mind-body consciousness relationships, the causality, Tridosha, and the Saptadhatu. And if you look at Nyaya, it talks about deductive reasoning, logical inference, and it offers 16 methods for scientific inquiry. And Ayurveda has used these methods. It has used it for diagnosis, nomenclature of known and unknown diseases and herbs. Vaiseshika talks about what constitutes physical matter and how Anu is the fundamental building block of anything physical in the world. And it is roughly translated as atom, but Anu is not exactly atom, but the concept is similar. And Vaiseshika Darshana also talks of classification and property of matter, formation of new substances, heat and transformation. And these have been used by Ayurveda to understand the physical body, to understand herbs, drugs, drug combinations, processing of food and herbs. So all the physical aspect of the body have been understood using the concepts of Vaiseshika. Mimamsa is a very interesting darshana. It provides a logical decision support system for validating and interpreting text. So, for example, let's say that there are two Ayurvedic texts and they are talking of the same subject but in contradictory terms. So, which one is right? So, we need to have a systematic way of analyzing these texts and then find out which one is actually the truth. So that methodology is given by Mimamsa. And this has helped Ayurveda in derivation of hypothesis and also law of cause and effect. Yoga talks about union with ultimate reality, and Ayurveda has used the concepts of yoga to understand the union of body, mind, and consciousness. In fact, the understanding of the Sukshma Sharira, the subtle aspect of the body, comes from yoga. Now, Uttara Mimamsa talks about interconnectedness and consciousness and humans as an indivisible whole. This kind of conceptualization has actually come from Uttara Mimamsa. So you see, so why do they differ? Why do these two systems, the conventional medicine, that is the allopathic system, and Ayurveda differ? They differ because they differ in their basic sciences. Now let us go to the third question. What is the source of their differences? Where exactly does this difference start? So when we talk of clinical medicine, be it allopathy or Ayurveda, the end point is treatment. I mean, if you are talking of not of health but of disease, the end point, what all the doctors look at is how to treat and cure the patient. So treatment is defined by diagnosis, and diagnosis is defined by how the human system is understood. If the human system is understood in terms of molecules and genes and receptors and cells and tissues, diagnosis will speak the same language and the treatment will be in tune with diagnosis. If the human system is understood using Vata, Pitta and Kapha and other parameters in Ayurveda, diagnosis will speak the same language and treatment will be in tune with these parameters. Now, why should the human system be understood in two different ways? So I already said that the basic sciences play a major role in it, but in specific, how these contributing basic sciences view the world, how they view the reality, is where the fundamental difference between the different systems of medicine comes. So this is actually the source of the differences between the medical systems. So the basic sciences provide understanding of the reality, or in other words, you can call it a worldview. So if you look at the contribution of physics, apart from from technology and concepts, the fundamental contribution of physics to modern biology and medicine is its perspective on reality and worldview. So it has both modern biology and medicine, they have adopted the worldview of classical physics or Newtonian physics. You all know that there are two major branches in physics. One is a quantum physics, the other is a classical physics. Both of them have very different worldview, but the worldview that has been adopted by both modern biology and medicine is that of the Newtonian worldview. And it views the world as being made up of building blocks. So the classical worldview says that reality is made of material objects. Larger objects can be reduced to smaller ones. Objects behave deterministically and physical laws govern these objects. But what is of immediate interest to us is the second point: larger objects can be reduced to smaller ones. So here we have the large object. The large object is the human system, and it is now reduced to that of the fundamental entities. So this is why we generally refer to modern medicine as having a reductionistic viewpoint. It reduces the human system into the fundamental entities. And in fact, modern medicine is also, sometimes it is known as molecular medicine, because it understands diseases as derangement at the level of molecule. Many a time diagnosis is made at this level, and the treatments are also sometimes given at this level. So here the focus is on structures. So this is called structural reductionism, and where a complex system is broken down into its components, and it is generally believed that the sum of the parts gives information about the complex system. But these concepts are now changing, and with systems biology, we talk of emergent properties, and how some of its parts, some of the parts do not make up give you a complete information about the system. So this structural viewpoint is reflected in everything that modern medicine does, be it diagnosis, be it treatment, be it diet and nutrition. So this methodological reductionism pervades and predominates modern medicine. There are advantages of reductionism. It gives better understanding of the components and processes involved at the cellular level. And it also helps us identify the malfunctioning components, and one can give targeted therapies. So if we talk of Ayurveda, um, we use the same picture, and then here we see that the difference again arises from here. And what is the worldview of that has been adopted by Ayurveda? It is the Indic worldview, or it's a Vedic worldview, which talks of interconnectedness. So it says, the Vedic worldview says that nature exists as a continuum. The universe is a dynamic web of interconnected and inseparable entities in a dynamic relationship. And because of this worldview, Ayurveda has conceptualized the human system as having 4 interconnected domains. So each of these domains is intraconnected as well. And there are also parameters which connects these different domains. As I said, according to me, the very interesting connection for me personally is how this very subtle aspect of our existence is connected to the very gross aspect of our existence. So there are levels of awareness, and the first level of awareness is that of the physical body, and that is exactly what connects these 2 domains. So there are, many concepts in Ayurveda which are currently being discussed in modern medicine as well. For example, personalized treatment and health, preventive medicine, promotive health, systems approach, circadian rhythm and health, mind and health, precision nutrition, therapeutic nutrition, sustainable medicine, environmental and ecological health. So all these are topics which are being discussed and coming up in a very big way in modern medicine. And at the same time, these are also topics which have been discussed in Ayurveda, and they are already in a they have already been translated to into practical applications. So this is why the differences they do matter, because we are talking of a system which has concepts which are being discussed in modern medicine, and they also have a very different viewpoint. Now there is no fun, if Ayurveda also has the same viewpoint of modern medicine, then it's not going to solve the problem. So we know that there are certain stumbling blocks, hurdles that modern medicine is facing, which is why the diseases are on the increase, and they are not able to manage it to the extent that they should be. And so a different viewpoint is definitely the need of the hour, and Ayurveda has a different viewpoint, and so would the other alternative systems also, they also would be having a different viewpoint. But then when we are trying to use or bring together different systems, it is very important to understand where the differences lie, and so that the systems are brought together and used for the benefit of the patient without compromising on any of the positive nuances of the system. So let me stop here. And this is, I mean, this is the translation of, may all be happy, sarve bhavantu sukhinah, sarve santu niramayaha. So may all be happy, may all be healthy, may all enjoy prosperity, may none suffer. This is the dictum that Ayurveda follows. This again is a very big difference between modern medicine and Ayurveda. Health and disease are not business in Ayurveda, and it's very categorically mentioned that this is the dictum to be followed. So this, I think, is one of the major difference between the two systems. So let me stop here, and I thank once again for having invited me to share some of my thoughts on this very interesting topic. Thank you.
Am I audible? Yeah. Thank you, ma'am, for that wonderful exposition. And very lucidly, you brought out the epistemological differences between the two systems of medicine, Ayurveda and the allopathic medicine. And I'm sure there are lots of interesting features and nuances which merit a lecture on its own accord, for which we will again look forward to your continuous visit and continuous interactions with us. But for the remaining time that we have you with us, I request my members from the audience, if they have any question, you can please raise your hand with the icon that is shown here, or you may also choose to type it. That's up to you. I see the hands of Achyuta Rakesh. Can you please unmute yourself and please introduce yourself? Say where you're affiliated with, and then please ask your question. I request that please keep your question brief and do not give any kind of a sub-lecture. Thank you. Achyuta, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you for your wonderful lecture, ma'am. It gave very insightful insights to me. Myself, Rakesh from MNC department, IIT BHU. So my question is, ma'am, when we see, I understood that as the basic sciences differ, the whole perspective in which Ayurveda and medical sciences see differ. But my question is, how do we deal with some of the things which are not there in Ayurveda? Let us say, for example, the concept of DNA and some of the cell structure. I mean, when we go into the molecular depth, it is not there in Ayurveda. Then how does Ayurveda deal with these type in this field?
Thank you for asking that this question. You see, I made a passing comment that see, when we talk of the human system, there are two aspects. One is having knowledge, having very nuanced knowledge about the system. So about down to the level of molecules and genes and whatnot. The second is managing the system. Now, what modern medicine does is it's managing the complex system at the fundamental level, right? So molecules, it's at the fundamental level. So whether that is the way to manage the system. So what Ayurveda does is, see, at the end of the day, what the system, what the patients would like to have is a treatment and a cure of the disease. Now, for that, management at a slightly higher level, which is what Ayurveda does, it works. It works. So, yes, it does not talk about DNA and RNA and molecules. I wouldn't say it does not talk about molecules. It does talk about it talks about something at a very subtle level, although there is no further explanation on that, but it definitely does not look at that level for management. So how it manages is very interesting actually. And so we start at the at this level, that let's take for example osteoarthritis, and modern medicine does not have any solution for osteoarthritis. Ayurveda can cure osteoarthritis, right? And so how does Ayurveda handle it? It does not know about the molecules and very subtle structural components of the cartilage and whatever is in the joint. But how it does the treatment is, it says that their vata increases, which one of the parameter under vata is dryness. So it says that there is dryness in the joint, so there is lubrication between the joints. Ayurveda tells that, and that comes under kapha, and that gets dried. And then it causes friction, it causes problems in the movement. So the treatment actually, addresses that. Target of the treatment is the dryness. So there are procedures for decreasing the dryness, there are medicines for decreasing the dryness, and there are diet and lifestyle activities which decrease dryness. So they use biophysical parameters for as their therapeutic target. So they don't seem to be losing much because they do not know about molecules. So I mean, I think this is one question that is being asked not only by me, but a lot of biomedical scientists and clinicians as well, whether managing a complex system like a human system should be done at the level of molecules. So lots of concepts are changing, and my answer to you would be that yes, it does not. Ayurveda does not know about molecules and DNAs, but it seems to be doing pretty good, well in treating and curing diseases. So this is something that modern medicine should think about. Why, despite its the vast amount of information it has, why has it not been able to translate it into a successful clinical treatment? And why Ayurveda, without nuanced information about the structures, why is it able to do better? Of course, people may not believe that Ayurveda, is far ahead of modern medicine in treatment and curing, but that's more out of ignorance and not knowing and biased view rather than the facts.
Okay, ma'am, I got it. Ma'am, another small question, ma'am. Ayurveda talks about the consciousness, right? So, are there any processes or something which connects purely gross matter to the soul or consciousness? I mean, I listen about consciousness in Ayurveda, but I rarely see any direct connection.
See, the direct connection is if you are going to look for information in Ayurveda, you may or may not get it. But the connection that Ayurveda gives is, how the way it has conceptualized, how it is actually, the domain of consciousness and the structural domain is connected. But if you look at chapters on how a fetus is formed and about death and birth, there are discussions on consciousness, and I'm not that well versed in this, and probably this is not the forum to talk about this at length. But I think for these there are lots of other darshanas, books which would give you a more explicit explanation as to how the body is connected to the consciousness. This is a very well discussed topic in many of the ancient texts.
Thank you, Rakesh, for your question, and thank you, ma'am, for that answer. I wonder whether our audiences really made note of it. Because of this question by Rakesh, madam made a very beautiful statement that Ayurveda is indeed much more advanced than the modern, in some aspects from the modern medicine. But then a lot of colonial hangovers and a lot of low self-esteem is the reason for the ignorance among the masses, because they consider that the conventional allopathy medicine is to be an advanced version of what is the tribal medicine, which we call it as Ayurveda. Be that as it may. Next in the question is by Vaidya Ahmad Savani. Can you please introduce yourself briefly and keep your question short?
Hello. Hello, Rama ma'am. Thank you for the wonderful session. Myself, Ahmed Savani, and I'm pursuing my MD RSBK in Rasashastra and Vaishnavi Kalpana from Gomantak Ayurveda Research Center in Shiroda, Goa. Ma'am, actually, I have two important questions. One of the important questions first I have that when we are talking about this globalization and mainstreaming Ayurveda, so what are your thoughts about regarding validating some of our Ayurvedic principles and medicines at the clinical models, the which allopathy medicines have? So do you think that we need to validate some of the classical medicines on the animal models and we have to go for clinical trials?
No. That's the shortest answer I can give. See, I mean, this is a a hot topic, and there are lots of discussions on this, and see as I said in the lecture, the entire perspective of allopathy is very different, and all the tools and the methodologies they are fine-tuned to look at what they want to look at. Now, Ayurveda, when you look at the treatment, we know that it's. I mean, there are Ayurvedic treatments where no medicines are required. Only changes in diet and lifestyle is done, right? And so the Ayurvedic treatment comes as a package. And as of now, there are no no methodologies which can look at the treatment package as a whole. Of course, there are observational studies, but they come very low in the hierarchy of validation and evidence. So, it's what I feel is instead of, doing work, doing validation with a methodology which does not suit Ayurveda, what we should be doing is documentation. And, documentation in a very, very rigorous, scientifically rigorous manner. And at the end of the day, proof of the pudding lies in eating. And so we need to document and show that we can build up statistics now with artificial intelligence and deep learning, machine learning. We can generate huge amount of data using documentation, and that can be shown as evidence. See, there are lakhs and lakhs of medicines and thousands of diseases that are treated by Ayurveda. How many will you validate? So if we spend time and energy and money to validate one, will the allopathic and the scientific fraternity, will they accept that the others will work? So where is the end? So we need to have a very clear clarity on what we want to do, why we want to do, because time is of essence, and money also is very important. We cannot waste money doing work which may not lead to results that we would like, right? See, ultimately, I mean, there are clinical trials on rheumatoid arthritis, and where all that has been shown is that it is Ayurveda works as good as methotrexate. I mean, this is a great, great insult on Ayurveda. So, we are not able to bring out the nuanced beauty working of Ayurveda unless we develop a method, to suit Ayurveda. And this method will have to be accepted by the allopathic and scientific fraternity. Only then we will be able to do validation. Only then it will be a fruitful one. The other way to do validation is, Ayurveda has a number of parameters which can be objectivized. So this is actually one of my major research interests: how to objectify parameters that Ayurveda talks about. So once we have techniques using which we can measure the Ayurvedic parameters objectively, we can use those parameters to validate Ayurveda. So we can validate Ayurveda on its own parameters, then validation becomes easy. But again, the question is whether this is going to be acceptable. So I think we need to have first, instead of jumping into having knee-jerk reaction and jumping into research, which may be a drain on the resources and time. I think it's important that the Ayurvedic Vaidyas and the allopathic fraternity and the scientists come together for a discussion, and what is going to work, what is not going to work, and who is addressing the question. Are there vested interests, or if it's just academic interest? First is what I have seen in my maybe close to 15-16 years of working in this field is there is a lot of ignorance. People do not know what Ayurveda does and what it does not. By virtue of being Indian, we all feel that we know everything about Ayurveda. Everybody has their own information, idea about what Ayurveda is. I think that should first be brought to an end, and the science and rationale behind Ayurveda should be explained to the allopathic and the scientific fraternity. Whether they believe in it or not, it is their prerogative. But the facts should be, told to them. Once that information is available, then we will be able to make an intelligent decision about how to go forward. Now, one thing is very, very certain is that without the help of the allopathic fraternity and the scientific fraternity, Ayurveda cannot be made mainstream. Now, what is their expectation from the Ayurvedic fraternity, and what Ayurvedic fraternity can deliver to these? I think that's something we need to discuss.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Sorry, there are others who are waiting for questions, so I'm sorry I have to request you to be satisfied with just one question. May I request Ram Thakur?
Yes, ma'am.
Please.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. My question was similar to what Vaidya has asked, ma'am. One point I would like to make is, how is it correct that one changes the testing methodology itself to suit Ayurveda? Isn't it unscientific, ma'am? Like, take the example of Coronil, which was released. It was tested on 100 people, and they had mild disease, and then Baba Ramdev came and said it works. It's like saying that if it's work, Ayurveda is best. If it does not work, you don't believe in Ayurveda, you are in pockets of like allopathic people. So, ma'am, shouldn't that change that attitude?
See, of course, I don't want to comment on that, but see, definitely what one needs to do things in a very, very scientific way, and also scientifically acceptable way as well. So if we are talking about a new medicine, I'm not talking about the classical Ayurvedic medicine. Suppose there is a new medicine which has been developed for a specific disease condition which is not mentioned in classical text. It has to go through the usual drug discovery process. It has to go through clinical trials. There is no second opinion about it at all. So it has to be done in a scientific manner. And
the clinical ones too, I guess, shouldn't they also be tested before the claims are made?
Which one? Clinical?
Even the classical text which is written, even those medicines, shouldn't they be tested? And like I had read about some studies which allopathic medicines take 10 years in trial and rigorous trial before they can be approved. Like, but Ayurveda claims something and without being tested and say that was my point.
But don't use the word claims. Ayurveda does not claim. Okay, so you're mentioning that the allopathic drugs take 10 years, or not 10 years, more than that for developing. But we are talking of a system which is 5,000 years old. So when you say classical medicines, these are medicines which have been developed many thousands of years ago, and they have been continuously used and tested on people, and these have been documented. So if you look at the texts, classical Ayurvedic text, let's say Charaka Samhita. So it says that let's take say a disease X, and it says that a drug formulation A can be used for this particular disease. So you will have to, you see what kind of information is given. All the entire recipe is given. What are all the ingredients for that formulation, and in what proportion they have to be added, how the medicine has to be prepared, and who are all the people who should be given this medicine, who are all the people who are contraindicated for this medicine, and what are the side effects of this medicine formulation, and if the medicine has to be given to those who are contraindicated for whatever reason, what kind of complications will arise. So these are all nothing but clinical data. So these are time-tested medicines that they have been documented as well. Apart from this, according to Indian Drugs and Cosmetics Act, the rule very clearly, the Government of India rules clearly says that classical formulations, if they are used for the clinical conditions for which they are indicated in the classical text, clinical trials are not necessary at all. So as per government rules, classical formulations, so if we have a formulation which Ayurveda says you use it for, let's say, herpes, and if even now a doctor uses that same medicine for herpes, clinical trials are not necessary. But documentation is very, very important. This is again my very personal view. So documentation, and where if there are any adverse reactions, if there are any complications, side effects, it needs to be documented. So we need to have a relook at these classical formulations as well. But as per government rules, clinical trials are not necessary.
Thank you. Poonam, next, please ask your question.
Good evening, ma'am. Thank you for such a wonderful lecture. And I have a question. Can Ayurveda cure cancer?
Can Ayurveda cure cancer? Is that your question?
Yes, ma'am.
In theory, yes. But again, Ayurveda also classifies diseases into curable, manageable, and incurable. So any disease, at the fag end, it's very difficult for any system of medicine to cure. But if it is at the early stage, yes, in theory it can be cured, and there are Ayurvedic doctors who are treating cancer patients, and in the early stages they are also curing. Again, I said documentation is very important. Isolated cases of one doctor curing a cancer patient there and another doctor curing in another part of the country, this will not suffice. We need proper documentation and probably clinical trials where the Ayurvedic treatment can be studied in toto.
Thank you, Poonam. Thank you, ma'am. Maybe the last question by my colleague, Dr. Sukomal Pal. Please, Dr. Sukomal, you can unmute yourself.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah,
you are audible. Please go ahead. Yeah.
So my question is from a patient perspective. I'm a faculty in computer science, so I'm not a medical practitioner, so I don't want to go into the critical part. But my question is from a patient perspective. So often, we see that Ayurveda doctors are not, in a sense, enough qualified. In rural areas or in semi-urban areas. A lot of people practice Ayurveda who seem to be, not, properly educated in even in Ayurveda, and often the treatment that they do seems counterproductive. It often, I mean, aggravates. I mean, although, I mean, this might be seen as, I mean, allegations, but that are also, I mean, for some that, I mean, that are seen as some experience. Okay. So my question is, I mean, Ayurveda as a way of medicine, I mean, devised long back. So how Ayurveda has been modernized? I mean, like allopathy medicine, which is more scientific in the way we are habituated to think science is. So in that sense, how Ayurveda has been modernized and also standardized. Okay, so across the country, so several people practice probably different dialects, if I say different dialects of Ayurveda. So how they can be standardized, or whether there have been some efforts to standardize the Ayurveda treatment. So I mean, it's little vague, I understand, but if you can sense my my question, then I think you can throw some light on it.
So the first part of your question, you know, that there are many Ayurvedic Vaidyas who don't seem to be qualified properly, and then, you know, who don't seem to be, you know, giving proper treatment. So there are, you know, good and bad doctors in allopathy as well. There are good and bad scientists, good and bad engineers. So there definitely will be Ayurvedic doctors who are not good enough. But there are many many good Ayurvedic Vaidyas who are working, you know, treating patients very effectively. And so it is important to identify a good Ayurvedic doctor. And so the Ayurvedic doctor also undergoes 5.5 years of training, just like MBBS doctors do. And there are Ayurvedic doctors with MDs as well, just like, you know, MD in modern medicine. So there are well qualified, properly trained Ayurvedic Vaidyas, you know, who have registration numbers as well. One thing that the patient can ask is, you know, the registration number of the Ayurvedic doctor. And I think the Ministry of Ayush is also, you know, coming up with a list of registered practitioners. So, you know, I mean, there would always be traditional Vaidyas as well, who will not have the you know, the who would not have got the degree as such, but they are traditional practitioners. And see, it's very difficult to make a sweeping statement saying that, you know, the traditional Vaidyas, one should keep off them. It's very difficult, because there are some traditional Vaidyas who are much better than college trained Ayurvedic doctors. So it's better to gather background information about the doctor and then go. But I can tell you that there are, you know, thousands and thousands and thousands of Ayurvedic doctors who are practicing, you know, very successfully, and who are treating patients also very well. So coming to the second part, that you know, how do you modernize Ayurveda? It's not clear what you mean by modernize. See, I think we should have, probably we all think that technology is science. Probably we tend to think that modern medicine, see, modern medicine is scientific. We are living in a period where we are seeing modern medicine grow. Many of us are, you know, part of the research community as well. So it is happening in the present, and so we believe it, right? But Ayurveda is something that was developed a long time ago. And you may say that, you know, in those days technology was not there. And so without technology, how can something be scientific? Now, technology does not make anything scientific. There is theoretical physics, there is mathematics where no experiments are done, theoretical chemistry as well. So where without any, one only uses the mind, and you come up with great ideas. And so science is what should have a logic. So there should be a logic. Logic should be scientific, rational should be there, and one should be able to explain it in a logical manner. One should be able to put it to test. One should be able to get reproducible results. Now, if you apply these criteria to Ayurveda, it satisfies all the criteria, right? So, I gave a presentation today. I presume, I would like to believe that it was a pretty logical explanation of Ayurveda. And I don't think it was unscientific or anything, except that, there are parameters which modern medicine and biology is not talking about. So there are parameters which are different, but they are tangible parameters. And Ayurveda is giving reproducibility, right? So, you have, 1,000 patients getting treated for let's say, osteoarthritis, the success rate is pretty high. So there is reproducibility, there is behind it. So I think what it is that there is more than one way to look at things. So we think that the way that we are trained in, that we are used to, is the only way. I think that's not right. There's more than one way to look at it, and that's what Ayurveda does. And coming to your third point, standardization. The whole beauty of Ayurveda is not in being standard. You see, Ayurveda, we are, each one is has a different constitution. We are all different physically, physiologically, psychologically, and even emotionally. So you cannot have a one-size-fits-all kind of treatment. And this is what modern medicine has been doing. Now it is now talking about personalized medicine. It's talking about pharmacogenomics. So it's now giving up, moving away from the standardized protocol. Now trying to get Ayurveda into something that modern medicine is moving away from, I think we should not do that mistake. The beauty of Ayurveda is in individualization, and which is why it's very, very successful. I will tell you a very, very small example, if there is time, Dr. Ramanathan. Is there time?
We have, although there are, I see that 4 more hands are raised.
Okay, so yeah. So, the beauty of Ayurveda is in the nuances, is in the personalization. So I think we should not try and standardize it. Although, there are aspects of Ayurveda which can be standardized, and a lot of efforts are being done by Ministry of Ayush and many other people to standardize a few other aspects of Ayurveda. But certain aspects, I feel, is the strength of Ayurveda and should not be standardized.
Thank you, Dr. Sukomal, and thank you, ma'am. Maybe one last question for the day. I'm really sorry to others who have raised their hands. We are running short of time. So Khalil Soni, can you please keep your question very brief, and we'll close the questions and answer session with that. Khalil Soni, please.
Thank you for opportunity, ma'am. As my question is about the standardization of Ayurveda. As we know that the Ayurvedic treatment is depend on Desh, Dosh, Kal, and Bal. As a Desh means geographical area, Dosh means Vat, Pitta, Kaph, and age of a person, and strength of a person. As we take one formulation, it works on the same disease works on a coastal area, but it doesn't work in a desert area. So there is a geographical difference.
Khalil Soni, can you please come to the question? Don't give a lecture, please. Can you please ask a question? Keep your question short.
Yes. So what is your view on standardization or Ayurveda, or simple standardization in Ayurvedic protocols?
See, that's what I said. The strength of Ayurveda is in personalized medicine. Of course, there are areas where Ayurveda also uses standard protocol. For example, during epidemics, in epidemics you cannot be customized treatment, it's happening at a large level. And so, there are instances where Ayurveda talks about standardized protocol, but the treatments are very nuanced, and, standardization will strip Ayurveda of those nuances. So one has to be very, very careful. And I think what we have to have in mind is that modern medicine is moving away from standardization. Why is Ayurveda, being pushed into that? We should not do that.
Ma'am, can we take 2 more questions, or do you have time? Yeah, okay. Ankit, can you please?
Yeah, I have time.
Yeah, because these people have been waiting for a long time. So Ankit and Sridharan, and with that we will close. Yeah, Ankit, please keep your question short.
Good evening, ma'am. Ma'am, my question is straightforward. There is any treatment spinal cord injuries in Ayurveda? Because in modern allopathy, there are no any treatment available for spinal cord injuries.
He is wanting to know about treatment for spinal cord injuries.
Spinal cord. As I said, even for theory, in theory, Ayurveda, is.
May I request Ankit to mute your mic, please?
Theory, there are treatments for all kinds of diseases, and which is why I said, the concept of Vata Pitta Kapha is actually theory of Vata Pitta Kapha, and it can be used for diagnosing all kinds of diseases, and whether they were known during the period of Charaka or not. And so, in theory, yes, but when if it's a very, very grievous injury, then the cure may or may not be possible. I'm not an expert Ayurvedic practicing Vaidya, but all I can tell is that in theory, yes.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Ankit.
According to
I'm sorry, Ankit.
Ankit,
Please understand, we're running short of time. Okay. There's one more person to ask the question, and this is not an Ayurvedic consultancy talk. This is a talk which is at a different level. So I'm sorry I have to cut you short. Last question, Sridharan, please go ahead.
Good evening, ma'am. Thank you very much for the enlightening session. I have 2 questions. I have typed them in the chat box. So.
No, please go ahead. Ask one of them since you have
my question
muted yourself.
Are the lifestyle disorders like thyroid and diabetes, which are said to be not curable and can only be controlled, be fully cured by Ayurveda? And if it is curable, like how should it be used in combination with the conventional allopathic practices?
See, the concept of Ayurveda very clearly tells that the causative factors of most of the diseases are Ahara and Vihara. Ahara means food, and then Vihara is the activities. And the entire focus of Ayurvedic treatment is what is called Nidana Parivarjanam, which means that removing the causative factors. So there are no Ayurvedic treatments where diet and lifestyle changes are not prescribed. So as far as lifestyle, changes are concerned, clumping it with allopathy will be very, very tricky, because there are diametrically opposite views for on activities, lifestyle activities, and also diet in allopathy and Ayurveda. For example, a person who has cold, Ayurvedic Vaidya will say that don't take citrus fruit. And allopathy doctor may say that it has vitamin C, so you take oranges. And Ayurveda that yogurt curd is not good, and allopathic doctor will say it has a lot of probiotics. So there are very contradictory viewpoints, and it's better not to club them together. So so if there are lifestyle changes, and it should be done, if there are medicines to go along with it, it's better that it's done along with the Ayurvedic treatment. I mean, this is again my personal view, and there would be other kinds of opinions as well in this matter.
Thank you, ma'am. Are these generally considered to be curable by Ayurveda, these lifestyle disorders?
Of course, yes.
Okay.
As long as it's not the very fag end of the disease, you know. So if it's a very, very chronic disease, then it becomes difficult for any system of medicine to cure. But if it's at a early stage and then, you know, or an intermediary stage, it should be possible. Early stage, it's possible. In fact, you know, Ayurveda would be great at preventing diseases as well.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Sridharan. And with that, we come to the close of this lecture. One aspect which didn't get touched upon was the commerce or the economics part of it. And when we say that it's in the European, when the pro-mercurialist and the anti-mercurialist stand, how did got changed after the discovery of penicillin, and how the antibiotic lobby tried to push down the mercury lobby, purely based on the economics and the commerce part of it, also plays a major role in giving a platform to the traditional medicines, which we are also seeing in today in the pandemic stage, where ivermectin is supposed to have a very simpler cure compared to the hi-fi medicines that were administered in the last 1.5 years. So commerce and economics also in this current era that we live in, not just the science and technology, that also plays a major role in giving the platform to the traditional medicine, particularly Ayurveda in our country. With that, I immensely thank ma'am and all my listeners for. I think this was among all the lectures in the semester, this was the first lecture which had maximum amount of interactions from the students. I thank you on my personal behalf and also on behalf of my institute for having accepted and spent your valuable time interacting with us. We hope that our interactions continue and you frequent to talk to us, not just on this topic, but also on various other topics on which you have done authoritative research, be it the effect of mantra on the chemicals of the brains, mapping it through the MRI, so on and so forth. There are multiple vistas or occasions through which we'll be happy to listen to you in the future. With that, I thank you, thank one and all, and thank you once again, ma'am. Namaste.
Thank you all for being such patient audience, and thank you for inviting me, Dr. Ramanathan.
Thank you, ma'am.